between Russia and Kazakhstan. Ladies and gentlemen, we have held a very constructive and useful talks in an atmosphere of trust. This is a special year. We'll celebrate the 30th anniversary of our diplomatic relations this year. Over this time, Russia and Kazakhstan have built a strategic partnership. The traditional ties of good neighborship and cooperation are now supplemented by trade, economic, humanitarian, and military technical fields. A plan of events that we have just signed is devoted to the anniversary, but it's aimed at practical actions to ensure that the agreements reached by our presidents are met, including those agreed on the 10th of February when the President of Kazakhstan visited the Russian Federation. We will pay priority attention to expanding our treaty base, and we can note that the practical projects that we have between us are being implemented at a good pace. We have confirmed that we are waiting and looking forward to the Kazakhstan president visiting the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and we will have a wide representation of Russian regions in bilateral projects with Kazakhstan. Trade is growing, a record $25.5 billion last year, and we have growing supplies in both directions, and we will build on this success and we will maintain positive dynamics. The ministries and agencies working on this have reported that all the projects are on schedule. An agreement was signed to open university branches on the territories of our countries, and this agreement involves opening branches of the Moscow State University of Oil and Gas and the Moscow Institute of Physics. We have also discussed the importance of ensuring the rights and freedoms of people, and together we will counter all attempts to harm our relations. We have agreed to activate a group of historians of Russia and Kazakhstan and exchanged views on the current international agenda. We agreed that our cooperation is an important factor in maintaining stability in Central Asia and the Eurasian continent as a whole. We've discussed cooperation based on CSTO, this SOC, the CIS, and other international formats and platforms, and the initiative to the initiative on confidence-building measures in Asia is also important. We have welcomed Kazakhstan's chairmanship in the CIS, first of all, in the humanitarian and economic areas. We agreed to conduct preparatory activities for the 6th Caspian Summit, summit of the Caspian Five. We will help ensure that this summit is productive and that meaningful agreements are made at the summit. As regards regional security, we discussed Afghanistan. We also discussed Afghanistan during a video conference in the Central Asia plus Russia format. The situation in Afghanistan is difficult, and it certainly has an impact on the situation in the region. The events in January demonstrated how important it is to be united in the fight against terrorism, drug trafficking, and transborder international crime. And both on the meeting that has taken place recently and today, we have discussed the Ukrainian situation. We informed our colleagues on the progress of the special military operation, the protection of people of the Donbass, demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, and we shared our views on the opinion on the fact that Russia-Ukraine talks are being slow. We have no doubt that our partners and allies have a clear understanding of the root causes of what is happening in Eurasia and in the world, and understand the geopolitical dimension of the current situation. We are satisfied with the results of these talks. We agreed to maintain a communication. We'll have plenty of opportunities to continue to engage this year and achieve practical results. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, first of all, I'm grateful to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, for a traditionally warm welcome. Our meeting is on Easter's Eve, so I'd like to wish you a good Easter and wish everyone in the Christian world a good and successful time. This meeting takes place during an anniversary year. It's 30 years since our countries established diplomatic relations. We're opening a new page in our multi-sided relations. We've built a strategic partnership and alliance built on the sound historical foundation of mutual respect, the respect for each other's sovereignty and interests, both bilaterally and multilaterally. We signed a plan of events to celebrate the 30th anniversary of diplomatic relations, including a number of ceremonial events demonstrating the high level of interstate partnership and friendship. We've discussed a wide range of topics, including the current state and prospects of political, economic, and cultural and humanitarian sphere. We've exchanged our views on a number of topics on the international agenda, including ensuring stability and security in the region and in the world. We've noted similar approaches about the need to build trust in the global policy dialogue. We've also compared notes on the traditionally busy schedule of international events this year, including at the top level, like the bilateral events that we're going to have and multilateral events as well. Cooperation with Russia has been and remains a priority for a country. We're willing and we intend to build long-term relations, to meet common challenges, including solving the tasks put forward by the leaders of our states. The results of these talks have been a good symbol of our good friendship. Thank you. Now, questions. Mr. Lavrov, I have two questions, if I may. What future does Russia see for the Eurasian Economic Union? Considering the mounting sanctions, how will this influence the economic relations? And second, Kazakhstan has become a proved platform for Syrian talks. So do you see Kazakhstan as a platform for the talks between Russia and Ukraine? As to the Eurasian Economic Union, the question is not how Russia sees this future, but rather how all the countries within the Eurasian Economic Union intended to build their strategic partnership. You've mentioned sanctions, which are illegal and illegitimate, which were introduced on an unprecedented scale by our Western partners when they saw that their plan to turn Ukraine into a launchpad to exert force to contain Russia have failed, and all the further actions of our Western colleagues show a complete disregard for the principles and norms that they themselves put in the foundation of the current global system, such as the WTO, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and other structures. We see that it's not possible to expect that any agreements will be honored, and that the values that they tried to prove were fundamental are now being disregarded. And not only in the Eurasian Economic Union, but also in other formats. I've discussed with colleagues from the Latin American and the Arab regions. Everywhere, people are now turning to the idea that there needs to be a way to prevent the West from influencing processes in other regions, using its advantage, this influence that it has built as part of the trends for globalization, to abuse its position as the unipolar dominant side. So, irrespective of what is happening, because we've seen many examples of abusing the status of the dollar. We've seen that for several years already. So now, several countries, including us, together with our key partners at the Eurasian Union and other trade and economic partners, are working to diversify the mechanisms and methods of financial cooperation. We're transferring to national currencies and national money transfer systems, which creates a safety net against the selfish behavior by Western countries that we've seen. There have been several meetings on Vice Prime Minister level devoted to continuing our integration plans in the new environment, where we need to rely on ourselves much more than before and on trusted partners from other regions, such as China. You know that Eurasian Economic Union has an agreement on economic engagement with China, and European integration processes are being aligned with the Chinese One Belt, One Road project. Other colleagues from Asian and South Asian countries are joining this effort, including India, with whom we had an intensive cooperation on building transport corridors, which will be beneficial for members of the Eurasian Economic Union and other efforts as well. And as to the CIS, where a free trade area is operational, there are now processes to look into ways to continue our fruitful cooperation in the new conditions where discriminatory measures are introduced to try and slow it down. So the Eurasian Economic Union does have a future, and all the member countries are working to ensure that this future is positive. As to Kazakhstan as a platform for Syrian talks, well, the main talks that are called the Geneva process are held in Geneva, but the Astana III is traditionally hosted to meetings with the governments, the opposition and observer states on the territory of the friendly and hospitable Kazakhstan. And I'm sure that we will continue this tradition. Do you plan to use Kazakhstan as a platform from Russia-Ukraine talks? Do you have any other questions? As to Russia-Ukraine talks, I wouldn't talk about platforms, but I would rather discuss Ukrainian attitude to the idea of talks. It's very strange to hear statements by Ukrainian representatives, including the president and his aides, that give us the thought that they don't need the talks and that they have reconciled to their fate. I'd like to ask a question to both ministers. Did you discuss biolaboratories in Kazakhstan and the banking problems that many Russian companies are currently seeing in Kazakhstan? Well, I will answer the question about biolaboratories. We are now preparing a bilateral memorandum on this issue, and we've adopted statements and documents on this issue and on biosafety in general, and the strengthening of the convention and the prohibition of chemical weapons and toxins on CSTO and CIS leader level. And as to Russian companies and Kazakhstan banks, we've also discussed that, and I hope my colleague will comment on that. Yes, the issue of biosafety in the biolaboratories is one of the most relevant issues on the international agenda right now, especially with the coronavirus pandemic that has been so rampant recently. We have an active cooperation with Russia, and we're grateful for supporting the Kazakhstan president's initiative to create an international biosafety agency under the UN. On our part, we supported the Russian initiative to launch a coordination council on biosafety under the committee of secretaries at CSTO. We have a lot of work before us, and I think that we will conclude a protocol to amend the organization's charter. As to biolaboratories in Kazakhstan, as you know, we've announced our plans to build laboratories with biosafety level 4. It's an open process. We're open for international cooperation, and both scientists and laboratories from Russia are very much invited to cooperate on this. And as to banking, you may know that the sanctions have been a serious challenge for banks and for ordinary citizens in our countries. Recently, we've seen sanctions against Sberbank and Alfa Bank. As you know, they have subsidiaries in Kazakhstan. As to Sberbank in Kazakhstan, we've managed to obtain a term of 3 months, putting the sanctions off for this bank. And this will allow us to have time to buy out a credit portfolio from the bank. With regard to the retail sector, the retail business sector. And now we're also having talks with secondary banks in Kazakhstan to buy out their subsidiaries. Thank you. I have a question to Mr. Lavrov. The Russian media have mentioned ethnicity-based discrimination as the reason for Russians migrating out of Kazakhstan. But with the current sanctions, thousands of Russians have moved to Kazakhstan, and judging by their feedback, they feel okay. So maybe it's not such a serious problem. If we talk about building cooperation and strategic partnership, and if we look to certain media in Russia and Kazakhstan for information, I think we'll have a distorted picture, because we may find a problem where it doesn't exist or blow something out of proportion. I don't have any data on how many people came from Kazakhstan or moved to Kazakhstan, and I'm not familiar with their feedback or with the reasons that move them to migrate. I think the current process is natural. We are brotherly countries. We don't have any limits on the movement of our people, and both Russian and the Kazakhstan citizens are free to choose where to live. The Russian constitution guarantees freedom of movement, and our presidents discussed on the 10th of February, when they met in the Kremlin, that we need to ensure that there is no difference from people from Russia and Kazakhstan, that there should be no difference where they are, that our countries need to have equal conditions, economically, socially, so that people feel comfortable. And that is the task set before us by the President. And a final question. Mr. Lavrov, you've mentioned the slow progress of Ukrainian talks, so I'd like to ask a related question. Russia has agreed that Ukraine would need third-party guarantees if it enshrines a neutral status in its constitution or international treaties. What countries does Russia expect to provide such guarantees to Ukraine, and what countries does Russia talk to on this issue? We're not talking to anyone on this issue at the moment. We did have talks which have stalled because 4 or 5 years ago we put forward a proposal to the Ukrainian side, and they still have not responded. But when we asked President Zelensky what is his attitude to our proposals, he said that he hasn't received our proposals. So we need to understand where this process currently is. But we did have these talks bilaterally, and within those talks, Ukraine agreed to be neutral, to be non-bloc country, to be a non-nuclear country, subject to third-party security guarantees. It's what President Putin spoke about in the beginning of this year on one of his press conferences after meeting with President Macron, I think. He said that NATO's expansion is unacceptable on fundamental grounds, but we are ready to consider security guarantees for Ukraine, for European countries, and of course for Russia in a different format. And that is what our attitude has been. And Ukrainians, during our first talks in the current format, asked for a group of countries to provide guarantees. They didn't make a written list of those countries, but they mentioned Turkey, Germany, permanent members of the Security Council, and we're not against that. We'll just need to look at the substance of those guarantees and to see that those guarantees are both acceptable to Ukraine and do not create a threat to anyone else. Second question. On the 16th of April, President Zelensky said that he would call off all talks with Russia if Ukrainian nationalists encircled at the Azovstal steelworks are killed. Yesterday, President Putin called off the assault on the metalworks. Does this mean that Russia accepts Kiev's conditions, and what will Russia's reaction be to such ultimatums? Well, we don't accept any ultimatums. I cannot qualify President Zelensky's statement, and I don't think he really understands what he's talking about. Thank you. Thank you, the press